of you have asked me, both in comments and DMs, to take a look at what's going on with the Abby Werner case. That is the current civil trial that is going on of the teacher in Newport News who was shot by the 6-year-old who is suing the assistant principal of the school that she was in for failing to do anything to stop that shooting. And it's a fascinating case. I didn't realize the trial was going on until somebody told me about it. It is actually being played live on Court TV. So I went and looked into it. I read the complaint. I watched the openings and the closings of both sides, and I've watched a little bit of the testimony on YouTube. And it's a fascinating case, but it's also actually a really good example of how just like general negligence claims work because of the way that the case is structured. So Abby Werner is a first grade teacher, a 6th grader. There's all kinds of facts about it, about he had had trouble before and did anybody believe that he had a gun. Long story short, it was reported to the assistant principal that this 6-year-old has a gun. And the assistant principal did not do anything about it. She did not go get the kids. She did not go take the backpack. She did not check the backpack for a gun. They waited for the kid's mother to come to school, which was about 40 minutes later. And by the time the mother got there, the kid had already pulled out the gun and shot the first grade teacher. Now, luckily, she survived. He shot her basically in the hand. And she sued the assistant principal, whose name is Ebony Parker, as well as the school board. Now, the school board is already out of it because school boards all have sovereign immunity. And so they are not able to be sued for the vast majority of negligence claims. But Ebony Parker, as the assistant principal, is still in the case. And the trial is essentially the teacher versus her. Now, Parker has also been criminally charged for this. And those charges are still pending. So they're doing the civil case first, which is interesting because usually it's the other way around. And the mother of the child, of the 6-year-old, is in jail for 2 years because, of course, she let a 6-year-old have a gun. I'm not sure the 2 years is long enough, but that has been taken care of, and there are still these criminal charges pending. This is a civil case during which the teacher is trying to recover money, saying, I can never go back to the classroom again. I'm completely traumatized. My hand doesn't work right? Like I've had to find a new line of work, and just generally like personal injury, emotional distress, damages. So the claims are essentially gross negligence. Just, there's not like a violation of any rule or any particular law. It's just, this was grossly negligent behavior. And it's a good example. I think it's easy to wrap your mind around. I was thinking I might use this for teaching, so thought it might help you all to understand how negligence claims work. All negligence claims have the same structure. The elements of negligence are the same no matter where you are. And those elements are a duty, a breach of that duty that causes damages. Duty, breach, causation, damages. Those are the elements of negligence. And they are actually the sort of rough elements of all civil claims. All civil claims are based generally on the idea that there was a legal duty, that duty was breached, and that breach caused damages. So when you're looking at sexual harassment or discrimination, the duty is you have a duty not to discriminate against people. You breached that duty by discriminating, and that caused damages. But negligence is a civil claim in its most sort of basic form. And so sometimes when those kinds of cases go to trial and there's no other claims, just starting at the first step can be kind of a hard part. Because if a legal duty is not defined by a statute somewhere, you have to establish what the legal duty is. You can't just pull a legal duty out of thin air and say everyone has the duty to do this, right? So in this case, the plaintiffs are trying to argue that Ebony Parker had the responsibility as an assistant principal to step in when someone told her a child had a gun. That she had a duty to do something more than she did, and that she breached that duty by failing to do it. And that breach caused Abby Werner to get shot and suffer damages. That is sort of their straightforward argument. What is interesting to watch is the way that the case is being defended by Ebony Parker and her lawyers. Now, I will say, in the brief amount of time that I have watched the openings, closings, a few witnesses here and there. Both sides' lawyers are good. They both seem to know what they are doing. They seem pretty evenly matched. So it's not one of those cases where like one team is completely outgunning the other team. Obviously, Zwerner's team is a lot more, it's very plaintiff focused and very like, how dare this happen to us? Like, she should be held accountable for this. And the defendant's argument, they are doing what a typical negligence defense is. They are asserting that, part of this, was this really reasonably foreseeable that this was going to happen? Is part of this Zwerner's fault, right? Comparative negligence, sharing fault. That is the number one defense to a negligence claim is the duty wasn't just mine, it was also yours, and you didn't do anything either. So if I'm responsible, then you should be held partially responsible, right? It's called comparative fault. So they're doing all of those kind of typical things. And it was kind of dicey the other day because Zwerner testified and she was being cross-examined. And they were cross-examining her on like, what responsibilities did you have? Why didn't you do more? Why didn't you tell more people? Why didn't you, right? So that is, and people were kind of like icked out by it. We'll see if the jury was icked out by it. But that is how negligence defenses work. But another thing they are doing, and they're doing it today primarily through experts, is they're attacking this idea that there was a duty to do anything in the first place, right? Forget about causation and damages. And yes, she seems to be upset by this and all of that, but we don't even get to that part because the first thing you have to establish to have a negligence claim is a duty, and there isn't one. And they are putting on expert witnesses to argue that under these particular circumstances, it is very normal for the administrator not to take immediate action. And they're arguing back and forth about, what's foreseeable and what's not foreseeable. But it's a really interesting conversation from sort of a legal policy perspective about, does a school administrator have a legal duty to take specific actions when they are told that a student has a gun? And does that responsibility change depending on who tells them, how many times they're told, how old the student is? That's a big thing in this case, right? The student's prior problems, right? I just think that's fascinating because I think a lot of times when we look at the law, we get very wrapped up in like who did what to whom. And this person caused this and this person caused this and all of that. And a lot of times plaintiffs' cases will work backwards from the damage, right? You've seen that in Lively Baldoni, like, I got hurt. And that is what I want everyone to know. And I'm going to work backwards as to what laws were violated when that happened. That's typically how plaintiffs' cases are structured. But the defense in this case is like, we're not even going to get to that point. We can talk about that later. We first have to establish that she even had a responsibility to do what you say she had a responsibility to do. And it's a really interesting discussion. I don't really have an opinion yet as to who should win or not win. I don't think I probably will. I haven't seen anything that's like crazy. I do typically tend to favor holding people accountable in a wider net for gun deaths. Like I'm typically in favor of, like, remember in, I think it was Michigan, when they charged the parents of a school shooter and they had to go to jail. I was like, yes, because I think that you can't just charge the shooter. Like you have to look at the community of how that was able to happen. And so I like that idea. I'm not sure how I feel about a school administrator being held civilly liable. Now the school board will pay for it, right? About her being held liable or even criminally liable for something like this. Like, the main argument that the defendant seemed to be making is nobody thought it was even possible that a 6-year-old would have a gun, much less use it. And what the plaintiff's lawyer said in their opening was, which I thought was pretty compelling, I'm sure they'll hit it again in closing, was it was her job to think it was possible. It was her job to think that anything is possible. But like how much can we put on administrators in these kinds of circumstances? So I'd love to know what you all think. It's a fascinating case.